If you did not get a chance to attend the session that I gave almost a month ago, I actually talked about the scholarship of teaching and learning a little bit and what kinds of research designs that you could use in your class to make your teaching better, to kind of use research methods to implement on your students. And if you didn't have a chance to watch that, Michael just told me a moment ago that he's already posted on the CTE's website that video. So you can go on that site, you can reference it, you can send it to someone else, you can, forget about it, whatever you need to do. That's fine, but that's there for you. Today, I want to continue that discussion by talking more so about ethics and IRB submissions. I want to talk about this not just from the perspective of doing research on your students. I want to talk about ethics and IRB from the perspective of just doing research. Like, what does that mean to evaluate ethical concerns and to submit an IRB proposal at Lee? Because I know that not everybody here understands that procedure or is familiar with that, or familiar with it from the stance of being at Lee. And it is kind of different at Lee. So I want to talk about that for the next 30 to 45 minutes or so. So first, I'm curious. This is out of my own personal curiosity. Is how many of you have absolutely no experience submitting proposals to an IRB, not just at Lee, but in the past, like at grad school at all? No experience. So this is actually really good news for me, and this is good because teaching psychology, I think I'm insulated in my discipline, and I just kind of assume that everybody has the same IRB experience and knowledge. So when I talk to people about ethics and submission processes, I just assume everybody knows it, and I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to ask that you forgive me if I make any logical leaps or assumptions about what you may or may not know, because I just, in prepping for this, I didn't realize how some disciplines just don't have the need for an IRB, or they don't, like for a dissertation in linguistics or language, you never would need to consult a human subject's proposal. So in this talk, if I make any jumps, or math, yeah, it's a good example. If I make any jumps and I skip over something, and just stop me. Don't even wait to the end for Q&A. Just stop me and say, can you kind of spell out what that means or how that applies to my discipline? Whatever works, just don't hesitate to stop me, because I want to make sure that I don't go too quickly and I don't make any assumptions about what you may or may not know. So let's start from the top. IRB typically stands for Institutional Review Board. That's sort of the common nomenclature of the IRB at most institutions. At Lee, that's not the case. Actually, at Lee, we don't have an IRB technically. We have an IRRB, which stands for the Institutional Research Review Board here at Lee. I'm going to shorten that to IRB because I think the two R's are slightly redundant, but that's okay. If you look in the faculty handbook, you'll actually find it called, if you're searching for the IRB, you won't find it. It'll be called the IRRB. And that's actually where our policies are located regarding current practices for ethics reviews. You can find the updated handbook, whether when you were hired or online. I found it this morning. I looked through it. And most of our policies are there. I don't know how much I want to say about this, but not all of our policies for IRB practices are currently up to date. There are some things that we in committee have revised and we're considering adopting and changing. So what I'm going to tell you today is the current policy, but it may not be something that fully applies to future practices. So know that these rules are at times fluid, and we might actually end up changing them and adopting some new ones in the future. But you can find those in the faculty handbook, which you can search for online, very, very easily accessible. The composition of an IRB mostly is a group of professionals, usually those who are familiar with research, who review on a regular basis, who are familiar with research. Professionals typically in a university. You rarely, if ever, see an IRB that's not affiliated with a university. So it's mostly professors who are specializing in some kind of research. And it's usually professors in a variety of disciplines. So you should theoretically see an IRB that maybe has a psychologist and maybe someone who is doing research in the sciences, the hard sciences, and someone who's doing research in nursing. A variety of professionals with different perspectives, different expertise, so that everybody on the committee can bring their own perspective. So in my discipline, this is how we would deal with that problem, but in your discipline, it's different. And so we talk about those openly, about how we resolve some of these ethical issues. It's a good thing to have this diversity on the committee. That diversity is also comprised of, at a university, someone in the community who is not a professional, does not have a PhD, kind of a naive person who has a very layman's perspective on the research that's being reviewed. So we at university level, we kind of see research as, well, it's practical for this reason, we're going to publish it, or it's practical, or it's ethical, or it's not for these reasons. But someone in the community can very easily see that and say, I don't know if that makes sense, or I don't think that that's an appropriate way of studying this aspect of human behavior. Someone in the community gives you a really good unbiased perspective. So we need that perspective on an IRB as well. So that's typically the composition. I would say on average you'll see an IRB committee of about 4 to 5 people, 4 professionals and 1 community member. But different universities do this slightly differently. What they're supposed to do is they're supposed to meet regularly to discuss the proposals by faculty or students. These proposals are outlining what you hope to do when you want to conduct research. This is my plan, this is how I'm going to collect the data, and you write all of this out in a form that I'm going to show you here in a little while, and they meet, most commonly they meet in person. They'll meet at a scheduled time. A lot of universities have it on their events calendar online. They're going to meet on this day once a month, so you know when to expect the review to be complete. Other times, though, I put meets in quotation marks, other times IRBs can meet electronically. So they can meet through Skype or Zoom, or they can just do this voting through email and make those discussions. With the advent of a lot of this technology that we have, we don't necessarily have to sit around a table and waste valuable time by having to come across campus and find a central location. It's not required anymore. So meeting is kind of relative. We can do this electronically, and at Lee, that's what we do. We do all of our voting and a lot of our discussing electronically, and it works really, really well for us. The whole point of an IRB is to discuss the balance between the risk that a study poses and the possible reward that the results might create, that they might come to light as a result of finishing that study. Is the risk to students worth what we're going to learn about them through this study? Now, if you were here in the previous session, you might be thinking, well, like, what risk is there? I'm going to give them a survey. There's a lot of risk inherent in a simple survey. A lot. You might not think of it. We'll talk about that in a minute. But there's a lot of risk to them and to you if you just give them a survey. So the IRB is responsible for trying to protect students from possible ethical violations and to make sure that it really is worth the study contingent upon the risk that you're going to put them through in the classroom or outside of the classroom. And again, I'm going to delineate what risk actually means, give you a lot of examples of that here in a little while. But that's their job. Their job is not to discuss methodologies, even though they think it is. A lot of times our IRB at Lee will give methodological recommendations. Well, you should try it this way. It's great. Yeah, we should try it. That's a good idea, but that's not your job. And I can talk about it that way, by the way, because I'm on the IRB at Lee. Because I can say it, I can bash ourselves because I am talking about myself here. I want to, no, you should just try this different design. It's a bit that that's not our purview. That's not our recommendation. That's not our responsibility. It's ethics, risk and reward. It's protection. It's not about methods. So that's the sole purpose of these individuals, is to examine your research idea from an ethical perspective. Now, how an IRB works is like this. Typically, you'll see a composition of 4 or 5 faculty with 1 community member who meet regularly to discuss these proposals. But it's different depending on the institution. So IRB recommendations where I got my PhD, which was the University of Alabama, it's very, very different than how things work here. At Alabama, we had an entire office with a fully paid staff that reviewed these on a regular basis. They had a structure, they had a schedule, they had compliance officers that regularly reported to the government about whether or not we were following ethical procedures. We don't have that at Lee. We don't have the funding. We don't have the guardrails in place. We don't really need it. We're not so large of an institution doing so much research that we need a fully funded staff with 50 people. That's not necessary. So each institution does it slightly differently. I know at some smaller institutions, they have 1 faculty member who runs the whole show. No committee, no community member, one person who does all the review. So when I kind of give you this overview of an IRB, it really does depend on where you are. Well, where you are is at Lee. So at Lee, what we do is slightly unique, and I'm going to tell you that. I've really never seen an IRB structure like what we have here. It's unusual. So here's what it looks like. This is kind of the prettiest graph, and I'm not very graphically inclined. So this is the prettiest figure that I can create for you, okay? What we have at Lee is essentially a centralized, I call it the university-wide IRB, but it's a central body comprised of a chair who we think of as Michael Freak. You know, that's what a lot of us are used to, is thinking Mike is the guy to go to. Mike is the chair of this university-wide committee, and he has a couple of us on the committee, one from psychology, we have one from natural sciences, we have one from, I'm trying to think. It's me, Joe Daft, Lori West, and Sherry Casper. And then we have a community member on the committee. So it really is mostly just the sciences, social sciences or hard sciences. We haven't really expanded that composition for a reason that I'll give you in a moment. So what faculty have typically done is they will send their proposals to Mike Freak, who reads those proposals and then makes some judgments about what to do with those proposals. In a recent meeting with Debbie Murray and others, we have decided that this is the structure that works best for Lee. That we have one centralized committee who receives those proposals and then decides what to do with them afterwards. Depending on what it is that you want to study, the proposal then gets reviewed by a kind of subcommittee of experts in that field. So we have behavioral and social sciences. That is a subcommittee of which I am the chair. So I'm part of kind of two IRBs here at Lee. I get the proposals that deal with research on human participants that the university-wide IRB has felt historically that they weren't necessarily equipped to handle. So when they would read psychology research, for example, they would say, I don't know if that's ethical, or I don't know what to do with this, because we don't do things like that over in the hard sciences or in education or in other disciplines before nursing came along. And so they created these subcommittees to help kind of filter out and figure out which method is best to determine what's ethical and what's not. So what I would recommend doing is kind of following this chart here. Send your proposals here, and I'll talk about that in a minute, practically who and where and how, we'll get there. Send it here, and then we will determine which committee needs to review it beyond that. It's a little unusual, but so far it's worked, and it's not violating any federal guidelines. I know that because, again, I'm on both of those committees, and I'm well-versed in IRB procedures. And I worked really closely with the IRBs at Alabama and at Middle Tennessee State, too, so I'm pretty familiar with this. So we're okay. We're not doing anything weird. We're Lee, you know, and we're just kind of our own thing. You understand that, you know? So this works for us. So we're gonna stick with it, okay? So that's kind of how it works. So here's kind of the overview about the process about how it works at Lee. Step one, okay? The IRB chair receives a proposal. As I said before, and I kind of hinted at this last month in my presentation, the IRB chair is officially Mike Freak. As of right now, as of this taping, Mike Freak is on the docket. He's getting credit for being the IRB chair. Unofficially, though, we're not exactly sure what the composition of the IRB is going to be in the near future. We are regularly evaluating if the structure that I just showed you is what it needs to be. Should we consolidate some of these committees? Should we change chairs? We're really having an ongoing conversation about this, myself and Mike, and Debbie Murray and Vanessa Hammond. So this is kind of in flux. So the question is, who do I send this to? Like, who is the chair? Come on. Historically, if you don't send it to Mike, send it to me. Because either way, it's getting to one of the two committees who's going to ultimately review your proposal. If you don't know who to send it to, I'm sitting right here, so email me. Okay, and then if I think it needs to go to Mike, I'll send it to Mike. If it needs to go to another, I'll send it there. So that's fine. I will kind of act as chair as we're trying to figure this thing out, and that's okay. So send it to me or Mike Freak, if anything else. And where can I find this proposal thing that you're talking about, this mysterious paper? Well, I'm gonna give you two answers to that. A place you're supposed to go, but you shouldn't, and a place I want you to go until we fix it. So answer number one is the IRB protocol and proposal document is in the faculty handbook. I reviewed it this morning and found that it is incomplete. That the handbook that's posted online does not include everything that you need to pass a review. It's only missing one thing, and it's missing the informed consent. Everything else is identical to what I'm going to show you here in a minute. So I really wouldn't go there, because if you forget that it's missing something, it's not going to pass a review, and that's going to cost you time. So don't go to the faculty handbook. Email the chair and ask them for the most up-to-date IRB proposal. What I envision in the near future is us having a separate page on the Lee website dedicated for the most updated proposal, which I also checked we do not yet have. The faculty handbook historically is where it's been, and I want to make sure that since I'm on this committee and maybe future chair, I want to make sure that we have a page where everybody can just access it and you're not having to bother people through email. But you're not bothering me. If you need it, I have it. I can send it to you. That's not an issue. Until we get a page up, that's easy enough. And I can do that in the next few weeks. It's not hard to make a page on the website. And then what the chair does, Mike, myself, we send it out to the appropriate subcommittee and they do the review. Here's what we do in the review. We determine the status of your proposal. By status, I mean at Lee, we will divide your proposal into one of two categories. We will consider it to be exempt or expedited, which means we will review it quickly and it doesn't have to go through all 4 or 5 professionals on the committee. It's not going to incite, or it's not going to require a review, because it's minimally risky to our participants. Anything that exceeds, quote, minimal risk, which I'll talk about again in a minute, doesn't have to go through full board review. But if we think that your proposal is going to cause unnecessary physical, psychological, emotional harm, then we will send it up for full board review. And that's going to require usually a lot more time, a lot more scrutiny. It's a headache to go through all of these faculty and community member, and it's kind of a nightmare. So, and the good news is, I'll talk about this, the good news is though that we don't have to go through full board review maybe once a year. You know, most of our research at Lee is very minimally risky. Y'all are not sadistic. You don't like to put people through undue harm. So we don't worry about that too much. But just so you know, in all transparency, we make those distinctions. So when we look at your proposal, that's the first thing I want to know is harm, minimal, or above. And then, depending on the committee that it goes to, we review it. We discuss it. We split hairs. We figure out if the questions that you're asking your participants are going to bring up any kind of emotional traumas, in my field, for example, or if it's going to cause them any unnecessary physical risks, if you're having them do some kind of exercise, or if they're having to do something that's outside of the scope of everyday living, essentially. So we make those determinations, and then we make a decision. Similar decisions are made at a journal, approval, revise and resubmit, or just outright rejection.
Where's the matter? Is anything pertaining to being able to identify them within this?
So you're talking about like identifying information about your participants.
Identifiable.
Right. So we don't necessarily consider identifying information as, it's something you don't want to do, something we're going to talk about. But if you have to identify them, we still don't consider that to be above minimal risk. Okay. So I would still put that under exempt and expedited, because IRB form, it actually allows you to justify why you want to identify those people, why you want their names or their student IDs or something else. So as long as you can justify that, we don't consider that to be overly risky. I know other schools might take a different approach to that, but it's not overly concerning for us, as long as you can tell us how you're going to protect their identity and why you need to do it. So that's why it's okay. And if I'm wrong about that, then I'll be corrected by someone watching this at another university. But that's currently our discussion at Lee, and we're okay with that.
So if I wanted to do a survey in a class that I'm teaching, and I wanted my students' names on there, would you consider my bias on grading them in my class as part of the risk?
Yes.
Okay.
That's going to be one of the things that I'll talk about in a second, is that it's not just the bias of grading, it's also the relationship that you have with your students that could be affected by your giving them a survey or giving them an intervention in the class. I mean, you could be compromising that student-teacher rapport just by researching them in a way. So that would be considered risk. It's risk to them, it's risk to you, and it's risk to the classroom environment, the integrity, the safety of a classroom environment. So that's something that you would have to identify in your proposal. It's small, but it's pretty important that you do say that this could happen. Yeah. Any other questions before I keep going? Yeah.
Are you allowed to, like you mentioned about the reason why you would want like a student ID, are you allowed to give like a gift card? I've seen some surveys where they offer a gift card if you fill it out.
Yeah.
The chance to,
You can. So that's gonna get a little bit closer to higher than minimal risk, and here's why. One of the ethical issues that we have to straddle is voluntary participation. Making sure that all of your participants are participating of their own volition, of their own free will. If you provide a participant with an incentive that they could not deny, quote, in their own right mind, if there's no way they could say no, then they're not really participating of their own free will. So if I offered my students $10,000 to participate in a study, nobody's going to say no to that, probably no matter the risk, because you can't say no to $10,000 if you're a college student, And so the question is, according to an IRB, where is the line that is drawn? Is $50 too much? Is $10 too much? Is $1? Is a bar of candy? Is a lottery of a gift card too much? That's to the determination of an IRB, and to the researcher's responsibility to tell us why you're choosing that method of incentive. Because I know that, for example, at the University of Alabama, that would be too much. I mean, they wouldn't let us give students Smarties because they thought that was too much. What college student in their right mind would turn down free food is the logic there. And so, and some of you know this because I used this in the last couple of months. I gave you all, the faculty, an opportunity to participate in a survey, and I said that you have a chance, if you put your colleague ID, to get a gift card. The IRB, and I recused myself from that review because it was my study. And I told them, I was like, this is mine, so you rip it up as you wish, review it as you wish. And they said that that's not excessive risk, and it was a $10 gift card, I think. That's okay as long as you can justify why you're choosing that method of recruitment. And as long as it's not an excessive incentive or inducement is what we call that. So that depends on the IRB. I can speak from personal experience that IRB is much more, I hate to use the word liberal, but we're a little more liberal in our approach of what is excessive. We don't necessarily think that $10 of a gift card or a chance for a $10 gift card is excessive for 30 to 45 minutes of your time. We think that's a fair compensation, but other IRBs at other universities don't. So I'll speak for us and say, I think that's okay. I don't think that exceeds the minimum threshold. If we change our minds on that, I'll let you know. Yeah. Other questions about that?
No, something else.
No, of course. Go ahead.
Informed consent?
Yes.
Is that form posted somewhere?
It is not posted in the faculty handbook. I'm not sure why. It is something that should be, and it's something that is posted to the document that me or Mike Freak will send you. Okay. So we do have that attached to it. I just don't know why it's missing from. It could be missing from the faculty handbook because different disciplines need different items on the informed consent. For example, anthropology and sociology need different items of consent than we do in psychology, more or less. So they may not have wanted to post a consent form in the faculty handbook because there's no blanket thing. There are some things that all consent forms must have. There are others that depend on the discipline. So that might be why it's missing. That is something that I've inquired about in the last 3 weeks. Haven't received an answer on. We're working on that. So email the chair. We'll give you one of those for sure. Yeah.
I'm not sure if this even falls under research, but we do health promotion, and I let my students go out and they created their own survey instrument and then went across the campus and
Yes.
just kind of
asked about safety on campus, for example. Just as a wild, I'm just making a variable here. It might not be real, but I just off the top of my head.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. And I was thinking of that as a community assessment, not as a research thing.
Sure.
But we're going to be taking it back. We're going to be looking at data, and then we're going to be talking to people. And I'm kind of wondering if maybe I should have done this.
So your students walked into my office on Friday, and they walked in their scrubs, and I because one of them's in my class, Caitlin, And she handed me a survey, and I said, well, what's this? And she said, we just wonder if you'd participate. And I said, well, be happy to. I said, what's it for? And so she told me.
Yeah.
And I said, well, and I flipped through. I said, well, so where's my consent form? And she said, huh? I don't know. And I said, well, what are you going to do with this? Because that's going to determine what happens with these data, which I'll talk about in a moment. And she said, well, we're really just wanting to kind of have an internal assessment of safety procedures and knowledge of safety protocols. And I said, so are you publishing this or are you presenting this? And she said, not necessarily formally, like at a conference. It's more of like an internal use. So she said, do I need IRB approval or consent? And I said, not necessarily. So publication or presentation is kind of the line, the easy rule of thumb that lets you know, do I need IRB approval to do this? If presenting or publishing, yes. If it's more of like for my own interests or my own curiosity or for kind of an internal Lee reporting, no, not necessary at all. So
I was thinking about that on the way.
Yeah. So no, I'm glad you asked that, because I asked them that same question and they were thinking, I don't think we need it. And if what they're telling me is what you're telling me, then no,
Right.
you probably don't.
They're
need that.
supposed to come up with an elevator conversation that they can talk to somebody and say, this is going to
No, then that's not a sort of a conference presentation or a publication. So no IRB is needed for that. So you're okay. You're fine. Yeah, you can just. You're good. But that's
So just for classroom discussion purposes, basically.
Right.
Yeah, not necessary.
That, and then
yeah.
we're going to do like
Yeah.
teaching on campus. We've
Yeah.
identified these things, so we're going to talk about
Exactly.
these
So yeah,
things.
not necessary whatsoever. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you had done something like that and then you hadn't done IRB approval, you could not use that data if you found something really amazing and wanted to maybe use it. You'd have to replicate your study
That is
and
correct.
go through the IRB process.
That is correct. So if you wanted to publish or present it somewhere else, you would have to replicate that. Something else I'll talk about, and I don't mind talking about it now. I mean, your agenda is my agenda. But retroactive approval is typically frowned upon, saying that we collected these data last year or 10 years ago. They're de-identified. There's no risk. Can't we just approve that? The answer is typically no. Because you want to, again, informed consent, voluntary participation, those are part of the research protocol. You want to make sure that people giving their data know where their data are going. So the answer is not necessarily, you don't want to do retroactive approval. So y'all are in the clear so far.
So you don't have to, you just you just do that ahead of time, just in case.
That's exactly, just in case. It's exactly
You do
right.
get
Just in
something
case. Yeah.
Well, future
Worthwhile.
years are coming.
Exactly. That's fine. Yeah, but no, your students are in the clear. Yeah. Any other questions? These are good. I mean, you're ahead of me, but you're good. I don't mind that at all. I'm glad I thought ahead about this stuff. Okay. Couple of questions that you may have about how long this takes, what the timetable looks like of IRB review. The good news is at Lee, it's much, much less than what you would find at other institutions. At Lee, we do a lot of our work electronically. So we're able to pass emails and documents, shared docs faster back and forth. We do this very, very easily, very, very quickly. Other institutions use pre-scheduled in-person meetings that are typically only scheduled once a month or twice a semester. We don't do that. We've talked about implementing it because we do receive a lot of proposals in the year. Just this semester, I've received over 30 proposals just from behavioral and social sciences. So it wouldn't hurt to have a deadline and a regular meeting, but right now it's just emails. We typically request that you give the IRB a 2-week window of patience, that you understand that with all the classes and proposals, that you give us at least 2 weeks to review your proposals. Most of the time we get them back faster than that. But 2 weeks, just like on your course evaluations, 2 weeks is kind of the grace period. For full board review, you try saying that 10 times fast. For full board review, we request up to a month. Because that does take time to get the community member in. We will schedule an in-person meeting with them. We don't do it as quickly as we could if we were just doing an internal exempt or expedited review. So you give them about a month of patience before you get a little bit antsy. So I want you to realize by saying that, if you've got a study that you're just eager to get started on, I can't wait to collect these data, you got to give yourself a little bit of a window between the time that you submit it and between the time they're going to get back with you, which doesn't mean that when they get back to you, it's going to be an automatic approval. It's very, very common, especially with me, because I'm kind of a curmudgeon, for me to bounce your proposal back because there's something missing, there's something unclear. It's very, very common for that to happen. And I'll talk about that again in a little while. What gets bounced back and why, we'll get there. The other thing you have to realize is that, and I hate to say this, and I wish it weren't the case, but there's no review over the summer. So if there is a study that you're thinking that you want to do first week of the semester in the fall, it would behoove you to get that proposal approved in the spring. Yeah. It really, really would, because faculty on the committee are doing all kinds of things. I'm leading Global Perspectives in May. I'm teaching a thing also in May. I'm out of town in July. So we are all over the place during the summer. And so it's just kind of a common rule, not only at Lee, but also most other institutions. IRB does not happen in the summer. So do us or them a favor and get your proposals out at the end of the spring or first week of the fall if you possibly can. But even that's really hard because we're all getting our syllabi and our classes, and it's just chaotic in the first week of the semester. But that's kind of the rule, is there's no review in the summer. So plan ahead of time if you possibly can. I see a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there an expiration date for IRB approval? Because
Yeah.
if, for example, you plan to start a study in August, but it doesn't get off the ground and you need to wait till January, do you have to resubmit the proposal?
So according to the proposal's current composition, your expiration date is 1 year. On the proposal, it's going to ask you, when do you want to start and when do you hope to finish? So if you say, I think that this study is going to last more than a year, just put that on there. But if you don't, and you say, well, I hope to start in the fall, but for whatever reason you don't get around to it, you can always do it in the spring, and that's okay. You might want to let your chair know, let the IRB chair know that it's going to start a little bit later. They can make a note in their database, but it's not really a problem. What does become a problem is if you have an ongoing study that's collecting data longitudinally over a semester, 2, 3, 4, 5 semesters, but you don't let the IRB know that one proposal was used to collect multiple semesters of data. It actually says in the proposal that you are responsible for letting the IRB committee know that you are collecting data ongoing with an existing approved proposal. So that's on you to say that that's happening, but it doesn't necessarily expire as long as you keep us updated. And if there's anything that changes between the time of submission, approval, and continuing your data collection, if anything changes, you want to add a survey, or you need to update the IRB also, they're not going to chase you down. At Alabama, they would chase you down. They would ask you, has anything changed? But here, like I said, we're a little more lax about that. So just let us know if something happens, and we'll make a note of that in our database. That's a good question.
Speaking of the time frame,
Yeah.
the survey that
That's
you
okay, yeah.
sent out,
Yes.
like you just sent it, and
Right.
then you sent maybe like one reminder or so,
Correct.
and then that was it.
And then it
So-
closed, right.
Right. Is
Yes.
there a time period that you should let? I'm just talking in general
Sure.
now. A survey be out there once you send it to your intended?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think it depends on who your sample is, like who your audience is, and what it is that you're trying to do. In my case, for example, it was up, I think maybe 3 weeks before we shut it down. And the only reason we shut it down as quick as we did is because we received over 110 responses on that survey. So it was fast. And my student who was analyzing those data, she's trying to present them at a conference next month. And so she wanted to go ahead and try to process those data as quickly as possible. But had we not had that conference deadline, I would have left it open all semester just to give people an opportunity. But the other problem is leaving it open is you see that over time, the response rate, we saw it decrease. After 48 hours of that survey being open, we saw 0 people continuing to respond. I sent you all that email, and the response rate skyrocketed. We had 30 more people in like 24 hours, and then 2 days later, 0 again. So leaving a survey out, at least online, it's going to die if you don't keep reminding people and probing them that it's out there. So I personally wouldn't leave a survey out there longer than a few weeks unless you're constantly reminding people to take it. Yeah. But it also depends on who your sample is. Faculty, we're busy. We have a lot of emails coming every day. So I wanted to make sure that I reminded you often enough, but I didn't want to, bog your email down. So I felt like one reminder was good for 110 people. That's fine. And those results, by the way, are fantastic. I can't wait to talk about that in a future CTE session. But mum's the word right now. Mum's the word. Other questions that I can answer for you before I keep going? Oh, I'm so glad all these questions are phenomenal. Okay, so scholarship of teaching and learning specifically, doing research on effective teaching. typically doesn't involve very risky things. I think most often in these kind of proposals, you're going to see you might get bored by taking my survey. You might have a paper clip or a paper cut by, taking or you might get a cramp by typing and these are ridiculous examples, but they are examples of minimal risk. I mean, they exist. They might get tired, but they're not significant. Very rarely do our classroom interventions require students to juggle fire, or, have some kind of physical contact or, bring up past traumas. We don't do those. We use non-intrusive interventions most often in our classes. 90+% of SoTL research, not just at Lee but elsewhere, is minimally risky. It's very unlikely that you're going to incur some kind of physical or emotional harm. There are other types of risks that Kathy, you had mentioned there, that risks about your relationship with your students or risks with their grades. That is real risk that might go above the kind of minimal threshold, but it's not what we typically think of as risk. Does SoTL research require IRB approval? The answer is almost always. Almost always. There are cases where a SoTL project cannot be feasibly done. You have to get IRB approval every time, but not every step of the IRB process has to be followed with some SoTL projects. Let me give you an example of that. There are some cases where if you gave students informed consent, it would harm the integrity of your study. If you wanted to study where students sat in a classroom, does that affect their learning? Simple example. Where they sit in the classroom. So if I started my semester off and I went up to my student and I said, okay, here's an informed consent form and it outlines everything about this semester's proposal. And on the informed consent, it tells you, I want to study if where you sit influences your learning. Well, now I'm going to be really self-conscious. So I'm sitting in the front, so I guess that means that you're thinking that I'm going to learn better than those who sit outside the learning tee, oh my gosh. So it's going to make them self-aware, it's going to change their behaviors, it's really going to compromise the integrity of what you're studying. So there are some things where you don't have to have every step of the informed consent procedure or the IRB proposal where it's just not feasible. But you do have to have IRB approval for this to be presented or to be published. Are there exceptions to this rule? Almost never. Not really. I mean, like I said, there are some cases where you can get around consent, but there are no cases where you can present or publish something without IRB approval. There's just no way around it. That is an absolutely hard and fast rule. You just can't do it. If it's presented or published, you have to have approval. And if you're not sure, do I need consent? Can I get away with waiving that requirement? Always ask. And again, I can be your point of contact. If you're not sure, if you're just uncertain, I know you, you know me now, we're kind of this big happy family. Just email me and I will figure that out with you and for you. But really, you got to have the approval, hands down. That's just kind of how it has to work. You might be wondering why, though. Like, all I want to do is give a survey, Like, all I want to do is just assess. It's not, there's nothing harmful there, but there is. There could be. The whole goal of the IRB is protection of our students. And there are aspects of the research process that could harm them in ways you haven't thought of before. There's something that came out within the last 60 years called the Belmont Report. It's a succinct summary of how we're supposed to treat all human participants in research. And it's kind of a response to all the atrocities that have happened over the last 100 years in research, ranging from the Tuskegee syphilis study, which a lot of you in the room are very familiar with, all the way through Milgram's obedience experiments in my field, and to other studies where children were abused in orphanages for trying to figure out how to best teach them to produce speech in youth. I mean, there are a lot of examples of how research has abused people in a variety of ways. The Belmont Report is kind of our go-to guide, published online. You can read it right now, and it tells you how you should treat people by upholding, respecting them, holding their beneficence, basically do no harm, and making sure that justice is served and that your your study produces more rewards than the harm that it actually incurs. That's a really quick overview. You can read that on your own. It's a boring thing to teach on. Take my classes and I'll talk about it there. But some things that could harm them. I mean, if you identified them or you breached their confidentiality on accident, especially if grades are involved, oh my gosh, you're not only breaching ethics, you're breaching FERPA, and that's a big deal. So you want to protect that information, or HIPAA in y'all's case, Students could perceive you're researching them as a form of coercion. You're in my class, so I expect you to do research for me to help my career. It gets really strange if students perceive this as coercing, because you should be participating in research of your own volition, of your own free will. And if they perceive it as coercing, then that's not okay. Which is why you want to make sure that they are participating freely, voluntarily. Which means that if you're doing research in your classes, you really should give them an opportunity to opt out, in all honesty. They should have the chance to say, no, I don't want to take your survey. No, I don't want you to collect these data from me. That's in their right as a participant. Part of the Belmont Report is the freedom to opt out if they don't want to do something, even if they're in your class.
In my undergrad, and none of us were aware of this. We were ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
We had a professor that outright told us, she was working on our second doctorate,
Yeah.
our PsyD.
Yeah.
And she wanted to do a research for it.
Yeah.
She said, you will get an A in this class if you do.
Yeah. That is absolutely, wholly, absolutely, and that having taught, you've taught, that's absolutely wrong, the wrongness of wrong. You can't do that.
And but, I mean, when I look back after I learned that was wrong,
Yeah.
it's like, I can't believe we went through that.
That is an example of overt coercion, where you just straight up tell students, yeah. I mean, there's subtle coercion too, though,
But as blunt as
Yeah.
that's pretty bold.
It's very bold and it's very wrong, And if we have time today, I'll talk about what happens if those rules are, broken. Because if someone in the IRB finds out, there's a special circle of university-wide bad place that you can go if that happens. And it doesn't. We hope it doesn't happen at Lee. But subtle or overt coercion is not acceptable. People need to feel like they're participating freely. And in a class, that becomes kind of blurred. It also becomes blurred because you want to make sure that students, as best they can, know what they're getting themselves into. So when you create a proposal, which I'll show you in just a second, when you create a proposal, you do have to give them, where applicable, an informed consent form that details what you're about to do, why you're doing it, what's going to happen with their data. All of that is in this form because they deserve to know. They are giving you their data, so you should at least respect them enough to give them back this information. And finally, like I've already mentioned, this process of doing SoTL could compromise your relationship with them in some way. So you have to protect yourself. You want to protect them by submitting this through the IRB. It's only good can come out of this. You're only going to lose a little bit of time in writing a proposal and a little bit of time in getting it reviewed and collecting the data. There's nothing else wrong here. We want to protect them. We want to protect you. So that's kind of the point of this rigmarole. So let me at least show you what this looks like in the remaining time that we have. I'm going to give you an example straight out of my research that I did back in fall of 2016. It was actually the research that I did that I outlined in the session that I taught in here last month, the one in my emotions class. This was a proposal that was approved from my emotions class. If you looked up in the faculty handbook, this is what you would find identical. You would find this cover page that details who the investigator is, where their office and their info is, how long are you going to collect the data, are you getting funding, what's the study called, and is it considered to be exempt or does it need to be fully reviewed by the board? All of that determination is for you to make on the cover page. And then I sign electronically the bottom or physically, and then I can scroll on down a little bit. I had physical copies of these to give you, and someone took them, shredded them from the copy machine as I was leaving Humanities Center. So I didn't have time to bring those to you. I don't know what happened. I don't know who has this against me. So I'm showing you this apologizing for not having a physical copy for you, but someone took those. Here, you kind of make the determination on the second page if you think that your proposal is exempt from full review. You can see all of these different criteria here. Most proposals at Lee will check the first or the second box, letting them know that we are assessing educational strategies, which is what we're talking about today. You're comparing instructional techniques or classroom management methods. All of that falls under option number A, meaning that the full board does not need to go and review your proposal. There are other exemption criteria here you can read on your own. Down here is the kind of the meat of the proposal, where you define for the IRB the following. Let me zoom in for you a little bit here. Concise description, including what you're doing and why you're doing this. What do you want to learn from this project that you are conducting? You can see here that my answer is only a paragraph. I want to know whether taking my emotions class improves psychological outcomes. You know, emotional well-being, beliefs about emotions, and so on. Number 2, what are the procedures that human subjects will endure? It's a good question. So number 1, subject selection. Who are your participants? Students in my class. How are you going to collect data from them? I'm going to ask them if they want to participate. I'm going to give them informed consent and offer them extra credit for their time. Informed consent procedures with an attachment of the consent form itself, which is always included in this file. Informed consent will be provided electronically. In my case, I did it through SurveyMonkey, as I did with the faculty. It says a link will be sent, so on. And I just tell them how they're going to say that they agree. There's going to be a button that says I agree or I disagree. Or alternatively, you could have them sign their name. Type in your full name. I don't recommend that option, by the way, because then it creates a possible identifier for your data. But it is allowed under IRB rules to have identifying information only on the consent form. But I think it's easier just to cover yourself by not having that available and just having them click I agree or I disagree. Number 3, what exactly are you going to give or do to your participants? What are the measures for your human subject? So what we're asking here is just for you to list the surveys or the interventions that you're going to do. Just a list. So you can see here, I would want their student ID number, the emotion scale, wellness survey. That's it. It was just a survey study. I didn't do anything else except give them surveys in my classes. Okay? I also noticed this. Participants' final grade in the course will be collected. In my informed consent, I told students, I will collect your final grades if you're okay with it. You know? So there's nothing wrong with having those grade data if the students have consented to that. And then finally, they will be asked to complete a series of assessments. But I gave them the option to opt out in the informed consent. If you don't want to do this as part of my class, you don't have to. I have an alternative set of assignments and surveys. That's totally fine. I'm not gonna penalize you in any way. So down here, is this an experimental project? Are you manipulating behavior? Are there any physical risks? Are there any psychological or emotional risks? And I said yes. It's minimal risk, but they might be bored or fatigued because I need to cover my bases. And then will I identify participants' responses? And I justify that by saying I'm only using student IDs, which are still identifiers, but after the data are collected, I'm going to replace those numbers with random numbers, or I'm going to delete them entirely. I don't need their student IDs right now in 2018. That's useless information for me. And it's risky to them because if someone else got a hold of those data, they could tie the data to their responses, and I don't need that. So I delete those data immediately. And I justify that. Beyond that, the proposal says that, this is what I was talking about earlier. If your project extends beyond 5 years, you have to resubmit a new application. If you have any modifications, it's up to you to let me know. That's just a caveat. Section C, this is interesting. It requires you to attach a dissertation level proposal alongside of your IRB application. I don't know if you have time to write a dissertation. I don't have time for that. So here's what I'm gonna go ahead and kind of pull back the curtain here. Write a 1-page to 2-page lit review that justifies what you're doing. That's all we're asking for here. You don't necessarily have to write a full-fledged dissertation-style 25-page proposal. No, don't need that. Just really what the IRB is looking for here is kind of the background, the rationale of your study. You know, where's this idea coming from? Has it been done before? Proposed methodology, rationale, benefits, etc. We don't necessarily need a thorough, thesis on what exactly it is that you're trying to do in your study. And we've accepted proposals on average 1 to 2 pages covering that material. That's fine. Don't let that word freak you out, because it really, really freaks people out. Okay. And then finally, down here at the bottom, this is my lit review. This is my rationale. Here's your informed consent. So I want to outline that for you very quickly. This is what my participants, what my students saw whenever I gave this to them in class or had it on SurveyMonkey. Okay? So if you've got any problems, contact me. This is what I'm doing. I did not hide this from my students because there was no point in hiding them from. It was a survey study. I'm not trying to deceive them. Down here, this is what you're going to do. I'm going to give you these surveys at the beginning and the end of the semester. I'm going to tell you what the surveys are. If you want to go research them on your own, go for it. I'm not hiding anything. I'm also going to get your quizzes, your assessments, grades, everything, if you're okay with that. No real risks here. Survey study. What are the benefits? Like, why am I doing this? Honestly, I want to publish it, and I want to figure out if classes like this are helping students, as opposed to just helping them, intellectually. Are they helping them emotionally and personally, and when they leave my class? That's what I want to know. You may receive extra credit. Here's how we're going to keep your data identified or de-identified. You can leave if you want to. If you don't want to participate, you can drop out at any time, and you're not going to be penalized in any way. Are there questions, complaints, comments, etc.? Okay. And then if you consent, click the button at the bottom of the screen. So my informed consent was 2 pages in total, and this is the standard form that we use across all studies at Lee. Mostly, except for anthropology. This is the standard form that we use. Anthropology is just different because they do different kinds of research. And then here at the bottom, the next, as you can see, from pages 11 to 32 are the assessments in their entirety that I gave the IRB. So they could review to see if I was asking anything undue, anything risky. They need to know that. So an IRB is required to have attached every single measure that you're going to give participants, which it actually says up here very, very early in the proposal document. It says right here, attach a copy of each measure. So that's required of you too. So the proposal really is kind of self-explanatory once you get your hands on it. It's just not exactly clear yet how to get your hands on it. So email me and I can give you that if at all possible. I have more to say, but I want to leave the floor open for a few minutes for questions if you still have them.
So we do a lot of simulations
Yes.
in the nursing department. And at the end of each simulation, we evaluate the value, did we accomplish our student learning objectives? And then we ask some general things like, what was the best thing about this? What was the worst thing about this?
Sure.
How could we do better in the future?
Sure.
Does that require IRB?
What are you doing with those data is going to determine the answer to my question.
We're trying to improve the simulation for the next time around.
Then no, doesn't require IRB. As long as you don't intend on presenting those simulation data at a conference or don't intend on publishing them, then no IRB is required. So you're okay.
Because they don't even get a grade for the simulation, it's just an activity.
Just an activity, yeah. No IRB necessary whatsoever.
If I am wanting to do interventions in a foreign language classroom, for example, do I need to translate all of the measures that I'm using into English?
Yes. So if the measures that you have originally are in Spanish, for example, the IRB, we don't have any Spanish-speaking or translators, and we don't want to put it through Google Translate because heaven forbid. So yes, you will need to put that in English for the IRB committee. Yeah, good question. Any others?
Do you have to have permission to use any of the measures from the actual, like the assessments that you have listed there?
That's a good question. So the answer is it depends on the measure. So most of the measures in my field, like the ones that I have listed here, are all open. We are encouraged, if not in part required, to publish our so the citations that I have here are the articles where the surveys originally were published. So if I wanted, the brief emotional intelligence scale, I could go to Davies' original article to find that. And they do that for free because we're expecting science to be open and accessible to everyone. But there are assessments out there, one that one of my upper level research teams is trying to get a hold of. It's a measure of emotional intelligence, but it's blocked by a paywall. The company who made it wants you to pay $90-something in order to access this once per participant. So it depends on the assessment. I always tell my students, if you see a paywall, then ignore it. Find a different measure. Do not waste your money. I mean, I understand, I'm talking to the camera now. I understand that you do great work out there, but my students don't have $90 per participant for their studies. So we're going to find a different measure of emotional intelligence that gives me a similar result that is free. And we will do whatever it takes to find that. So no, you don't necessarily have to pay for any of that. That should be open source. It should be in an article or on a lab website or something out there. I would, unless it is the prime measure, try to find a way to not to pay for it, or try to find somebody else to pay for it. Try to find a Lee grant or a QEP thing. Don't pay for that.
And as long as you list the source.
As long as you list the
original
source. That's right. As long as you give credit to the original source, you're okay. Yeah, absolutely. Other questions? Okay, then let me ask you one question before you go, okay? I want to kind of poll the audience here openly. So I've talked two parts as SoTL research so far. Part one, I gave you overview, very, very quick and dirty overview of designs of methods that you can use in your classroom. And part two today, ethics and IRB overviews. Again, there's so much more I could talk about, and there's probably a few things that I butchered and a few things that I might have said incorrectly. People from other universities. It's fine. We're okay. But there are still things left unsaid. Is there something about doing research in your classroom that I have not covered that you would want to hear about in a future CTE session? Or something that it may not fit in a CTE session, but something else that you thought, I need to know about that, and I just don't know who to talk about or who to talk to or where to go with that. Is there something like that comes to your mind very, very quickly? Anything at all?
I mean, I think if I would find something helpful, it would be what types of analyses to run on certain types of data. Because I don't have much background in quantitative analysis at all. I can do qualitative, but I know that some studies really benefit from quantitative analysis. So whether it's a quick overview of these are some sources you can use or anything like that.
Okay, so you're probably not in the same boat asking that question. I'm imagining there's a lot of us in here who are like, quantitative numbers, statistics, SPSS, I don't really know about that. I would say that it'd be really difficult to do a CTE session in an hour to teach you all statistics, but because, I mean, that really depends on the research methods that you've used and the types of data that you have. But what I will say is that if I had any resources for you, I would recommend these 4 resources for statistics. And I knew that she was going to ask that because A, she's my wife, and B, she played, I question. She planted the question. It's fine. I would say that the best resources would be these 4 right here. If you're not sure what to do with statistics, ask your faculty colleagues, and by that I don't mean necessarily in your department or your discipline. Like, start with any of us, myself or Dr. Tagayuna, Dr. Kicklighter in athletics. A lot of us know quantitative analysis fairly well. Dr. Swindle in political science. A lot of us use this. We teach it. So ask us. Number 2, I really love the UCLA website here. If you just type that straight into Google, it is a great website that will tell you what statistics to use depending on the data you've collected. And then number 4 is my favorite textbook in all the land. It is funny, it is irreverent, it is inappropriate, and it is wonderful. And it walks you through all types of statistics from great or small. It's about 600 to 800 page book It is a great weapon to use if you're at home or walking to your car at night alone. It's wonderful. And it walks you through statistics and research methods very, very well. Andy Field's book, I would recommend hands down. So that would be where I would start if you're kind of feeling your way through analysis, because you've got to do something with the data you've collected. You can't just have it. So statistics will be somewhere to start. And I would say start in one of those places. Of course, there are other courses, Coursera and Khan Academy and other places that have good courses, but that's where I send my students to. So yeah, good question. Planted question. Good one.
One last quick question.
Of course.
What about SurveyMonkey? Is it easy to use as far as survey?
It is. Okay, so I'm glad you asked that. So SurveyMonkey is, in my opinion, the easiest form of data collection online to use. However, it's limited. Because there's a free version that only allows you to ask 10 questions, and then after that you got to pay, and then it only allows you to collect a certain number of participants worth of data. So that's really frustrating. If you can get your hands on a paid license, which I have through a grant that I'm on at the university, and a paid license is only I think $250 for a year. You can collect virtually unlimited data, virtually unlimited types of data, and it's phenomenal. And it's so user friendly, it's unbelievable. I love it. But Google Forms is free, and it does the same thing that SurveyMonkey does. It's just a little bit less intuitive, in my opinion. It's just me, but I find it a little bit less intuitive. It's a little kind of clunky. It doesn't look as pretty, but it does the same thing. You can collect unlimited people, unlimited data. Google Forms can do the same thing. So if you're interested in survey research online, I would start there. Yeah.
Can Google Forms and SurveyMonkey export data
to Excel or to spreadsheets? Both of them do it. They both export straight to Excel or to Google Spreadsheets, whatever you're used to. Yeah.
Can you get a SurveyMonkey share account?
You can. What?
If we got one for our department.
Right.
The answer is yes. I think the highest tier, the first or the second highest tier of the paid accounts have the option to have multiple collaborators on an account. I've never tried it, so I don't know how effective it is, but that option is there, yes. Right now, what I do is I share my account with a lot of my student research teams. And so they have access to my data and their data, and it's a little strange, and I have to have them sign forms and ethics and protections so that they don't get into data that don't belong to them. But because we didn't have the money to pay for the really, really, paid account that allows you to have multiple shared accounts, but that is out there. Yeah. If you guys need anything else, please let me know. I'm gonna send Michael Sturgeon this PowerPoint so he can upload it and pair it up with the video he is inevitably going to put on the internet. That's going to be seen by millions and millions of people.
And you'll be famous.
I'll be famous. I don't want to be famous. For some of the things that I said, I'm like, oh my gosh, other IRBs are going to look at this and think, that's wrong! But right now, it does depend on our institution and our review rules. So we're okay. We know what we're doing here. What we're doing here is okay. So yeah, I'm all right with that. If you want the PowerPoint though yourself, feel free to email me and I'll send that straight to you. And a lot of you did that already for the first round. I've just basically attached these slides to the end of my first round from last month. So you'll be getting it twice. Or if you weren't here last round, you'll get the first round too in the same attachment. And if you want a copy of the IRB proposal, email me and I'll attach that in my email as well. I am here for statistics. I'm here for methods, complaints, comments, whatever you need. Email me and I'll be happy to do whatever I can for you. Seriously. All right. So thank you guys for coming. I appreciate it.